All right, boys, welcome back. This is going to be a quick review of Game 3 of the World Championship match between Ding of China and Jan Nepomniachtchi of Russia. Game 1 ended with a quick little draw. Game 2 was a victory for Jan in a sharp attacking position. Now we're on Game 3. It's going to just be a little bit calmer, a little bit more strategic. This time we're going to go into a game that's a Queen's Gambit declined. So I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to show you guys how that game went. Okay, so without further delay, we're going to get right into the start of the game here. In this game, Jan opens with d4. This is already a little bit unusual. Jan almost always opens with e4 or c4, but surely Ding was prepared. Knight of 6, c4, e6, knight c3. So with this, Jan is inviting a Nimzo Indian into his position. Play would typically continue with bishop b4, but Ding declines and instead plays d5, going into a Queen's Gambit declined. Here, Jan exchanges going into the Carlsbad structure. This is actually something that I play with both white and black. So the idea here is you play bishop g5, c6, e3, and at some point this bishop will go on d3, which we'll talk about in a second. But here, first, Ding plays h6, which is already a little bit stepping into a debate, because there's a debate here as to whether h6 is good or not. So if you play h6, on the one hand, you get a tempo. On the other hand, when you castle, your king is going to have a luft. But on the other hand, it is a little bit weakening and it could be a target later. So, Ding apparently is on team h6 is good. But this position has been played many times. It's been played by Magnus, by Vladimir Kramnik, by Ali Reza, by Anish Giri. So this is very, very popular and very standard. Bishop h4, bishop e7, bishop d3. So again, this is one of the main ideas of the opening and of the variation. If you look, this bishop is extremely powerful. This bishop can attack your king, it can attack the queen side, it can defend. And if you look at this counterpart here, it's actually kind of stuck, as I'll show you in a couple of moves. So for example, after castles queen c2, where can you put this bishop? If you put it on d7, it blocks everybody. If you put it on e6, that is actually a line. If you put it on f5, it's captured. If you put it on g4, h3, and you have to go back, because if you go here, you just lose a pawn. After bishop takes g6, takes, and queen takes g6, queen takes g6. So therefore, the idea is that this bishop is just much better than this bishop, and therefore white is going to have some form of an advantage. Okay, rook e8, getting onto the half-open file, knight e2. So this already is a decision, because another move here is knight f3. But if you play knight f3, that allows knight e4, and after captures, this is defended 3 times, and it's equal. And, in this position, if, for example, if you take, this knight is hit and you lose a tempo. But if you put the knight on e2, there's a little bit of a different plan, and that's the plan that Jan wants, and that's that you want to play f3, e4, and break the center. Additionally, if you play knight e4 now, takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, you're not hitting my knight winning a tempo. If anything, it's my turn, and I'm going to go here and attack your pawn. And yes, you can defend it with f5, but this is considered to be slightly better for white after just castles. Okay, so instead, what actually happens in this game is knight e2, knight b d7, castles a5. So what's the idea behind a5? It's simple. a5 controls b4. So let's just show you a typical plan for white. So assume for a moment black plays king h8. White would typically play rook b1, and I'm just going to play some nonsense moves for black. So king g8, b4, king h8, b5, king g8, captures. And the idea is just that this pawn is backwards and weak. So therefore white can go after this pawn. So that's the idea behind a5, right? The idea behind a5 is I'm going to stop you, or at least slow you down from playing b4 and weakening my structure. So Jan plays a3, which is the idea of saying he's going to play b4 anyway and then do it. Just going to take a little bit longer. Knight h5. So we talked about how knight e4 was not good anymore. So the correct move is knight h5. We exchange. And now the knight on h5 sort of suppresses white's knight on g3 and prevents it from coming out. Interestingly, this game was actually played before, all the way to here and still further. This is the game Giri versus Ding. So Ding has played this position, which means that Jan probably knew about it and prepared, having seen this game, before, because otherwise he wouldn't walk directly into it. Okay, so in this position, rook e1, again, that's obvious. We just want to play f3, e4, knight f8, and knight c1. So what's the idea behind knight c1? Remember, we want to play f3, but if we play f3, he's just going to take this pawn with check. So knight c1, we're moving the knight out of the way, and now the rook defends the square. Now we talked about how these knights were in a position, so when this knight goes back, this knight on h5 isn't needed there anymore. It comes back to f6. White plays f3, guarding the two squares that the knight hits and preparing to advance, and knight e6. So knight e6 is a move that looks like it's in the way, but it actually sets a lot of traps. So it looks like, this bishop is blocked and this queen and rook are blocked, but it sets two heavy restrictions on white. So first of all, white cannot play king h1. If white plays king h1, we're going to play knight takes d4, pawn takes d4, queen takes, rook takes check, bishop here, and mate. Okay, so that means that white cannot play king h1. Additionally, you cannot play bishop f5. If you play bishop f5, there's knight takes d4, takes, check. And although you have king f2, it looks like you're doing well because you're hitting the rook and the bishop. Black has the intermezzo bishop takes f5, hitting that queen. And when the queen recaptures, it actually undefends the knight, and the rook can save itself and win a knight. And now, in the resulting position, you're going to end up with two rooks against a queen, which is just going to be better for black. So instead, what white does is white plays knight e2 back, and black plays c5. So c5 has an interesting idea, and it's this. After the pawns are exchanged, okay, black has a slight weakness on d5, but white also has a slight weakness on e3. And the idea is, okay, maybe you can target my pawn, by doing this. For example, knight f4, rook e1, queen d3, but black's also going to simultaneously target white's pawn on e3, and if white ever tries to liberate with e4, which he can't do, by the way, because he's pinned, but if he does eventually, then we'll just swap weaknesses, and then neither of us will have any weaknesses. So it's a little bit of I'm going to shoot myself in the arm in order to shoot you in the foot, and we're both weakened, and let's see how this unrolls. Okay, queen d2, breaking the pin, bishop d7. So the idea behind bishop d7 is obvious. Remember earlier we talked about how the bishop on d3 was very strong and it was hitting all these squares, and that bishop on c8 was bad. So bishop d7 just says, look, let's just exchange bishops. So here, Jan takes, and Jan mentioned that he thought Ding was going to take with the rook, but that's actually a mistake. Ding played a much better move, which is knight takes bishop. And it looks weird because you're going backwards, but the point is, although this pawn is weak, it does control c4. And therefore, the black knight wants to make its way over to c4. If this knight gets to c4, it's going to be very annoying. It's going to hit b2, it's going to hit a3, it's going to hit the queen, it's going to hit this weakness, and it's going to be defended. So by taking with the knight, Ding is actually accelerating his path towards the queen side. So what happens next is knight d4, knight b6, rook d1, and knight c4. And already there's a lot of threats. So for example, in this position, it doesn't work now, but hypothetically, if knight takes a3, pawn takes a3, queen takes c3, you win a pawn, and this pawn is under attack and black would win. It doesn't work quite yet, however, because after knight takes, there's e4, and when you save your knight, white will just take here. But that's something to keep an eye on, right? And so the issue is, as long as this knight is here, it's going to be very annoying for white just to have all three of these pawns permanently attacked. And you can never kick this knight away with b3, say, for example, king h8, b3, because we'll just take this pawn. Okay, so you kind of have to just tolerate that knight. Okay, so what happens in the game is knight a4 hitting the queen runs, rook e1, queen f6. So queen f6 is a little bit of an inaccuracy, and this basically just makes the game a draw, right? So what happens here is Jan finds the best move, knight b5, just going in, being annoying, blocking some pawns, and Ding says, you know what, this knight's better than this knight, so let's exchange them. Jan says no, Ding says yes. Yan says no. Ding says yes. They go back and forth, and that makes it a threefold repetition, and that makes it a draw. All right, so super congrats, I guess, to both players. This was a much different game than the other one. I think that this was a much needed draw for Ding. Oftentimes, when you're in a match and you lose, it can affect your nerves, it can affect your self confidence. But, in this game, Ding managed to hold a draw. He's going to force Nepo to show him some respect. He's going to get his self confidence back. And if anything, he was the one who was slightly better in pressing at key moments. So, a great end to game three. I can't wait for game four. Stay tuned and we'll keep going.